This meeting is being recorded.
Never heard her voice before, but anyway, here we are. This is edition 156 of the Frankenstein chat. And for those of you watching on video, you'll see that we have a guest at the bottom of the screen here, James Eldon. Hello, James.
Morning.
Hello.
Hi.
Had a few technical issues, as you can see, trying to get everybody onto the chat today, but I'm glad you've been able to join us, and we've been trying to get you for months, so at last. Before we go to James, just ask Stan, how's your day, how's your week been, Stan?
It's been a busy week, but I was always looking forward to the Friday of this week because there was so much on. Anyway, it's all gone very well, and we're now at Friday, so it's a good week. And also, Stan, you're getting a new suit and a new shirt because you're coming over to my house to have some photographs taken this afternoon. No, I'm in the same shirt and the same jacket. It's just me that's older.
Yeah, we thought, James, that we've got some photographs for you're asked for headshots and things like that, but they reflect a Frank and a Stan of a few years ago, so we've decided to try and sort of revamp them and get some new photos. So if you want to, is in the sort of COVID period, I think it was, most clothes seem to shrink. There's some kind of problem with them. So as long as the shot's only from here, I can have a collar. Right, James. So thank you for joining us. Can you just briefly introduce yourself to those who don't know who you are?
Yeah, sure. I'm James Eldon. I'm the principal at Manchester Academy in Moss Side, which is a large academy right in the heart of Manchester. I've been a head teacher in Manchester for quite a long time. I was previously a head of the school in Windsor, Manchester, and set up a small trust there. So yeah, I'm a sort of everstay of the Manchester education scene, but obviously I'm part of the Headteachers Roundtable group as well across the country as well.
Yeah, and also a little bit involved in the Manchester Baccalaureate as well, which I wouldn't mind having a chance to chat about on this. So, okay. So, well, thank you for joining us. Let's kick off with Stan. What's caught your eye this week, Stan?
What's caught my eye is the fact that two separate ministers have approached Ofsted or written to Ofsted, insisting that they go and investigate a school because of a video, an audio, I think it was actually, and suddenly we're all believing, or somebody's believing, that children are identifying as cats in schools, and we are facilitating that for some reason. And if Ofsted is, as it's supposed to be, independent of government, then it should be Ofsted's decision as to whether they go into a school and not a minister's decision. And secondly, the story was, I know this is an audio, but they need to look into it deeper, because the story of children identifying as cats and being facilitated in that came from America, and it was debunked in America. For the life of me, I can't think that any reasonable person would think that schools in the UK are facilitating children identifying as cats. What
has it caused a stir in your school there, James? Have people been talking about it?
I have to say that, yeah, I mean, partly there's just a comedy to it. I said to you just before that, I had to teach drama for a year here, and I said if I could have got some of my students to act as any animal within that, I'd have felt quite chuffed for myself. But I think that people have almost seen it as almost comedy, but there's a school in the middle of it. There'll be a head teacher in the middle of it. There'll be a group of parents in the middle of it. And I think that there is still that slight sort of, sometimes these things now just catch, don't they? Social media, it's a great headline, school has cat children or whatever. It's like a Marvel Comics kind of thing. And actually, that there's a ripple of amusement, but then you just think to yourself, well, what if that was me? And then suddenly I'm having to do press, or my parents and no matter how nonsensical it might be, all of a sudden the anxiety raised, the leadership in that school are going to be really tense, aren't they? They're going to be worried, and the governors and the families. So yeah, there's always a school in the middle of it, isn't it? That's, you know, and I know that's obvious, but too often I think that's forgotten.
Yeah.
I worry about the precedent this sets now for students recording lessons covertly or editing lessons and putting them out on social media, which then catches an MP or a minister to say, oh, there's a real crisis again here, we need to investigate. Because Ofsted can't be being sent to every school that some minister wants them to go to. It's supposed to be independent. It's independent of government. So it should be Ofsted who are making those decisions.
I think though that idea of that independence has gone. I think, you know,
But they still claim it, Frank.
Yeah, I agree, but you know, in reality, I think it's not there anymore.
I don't believe for 1 minute they are independent of the DfE and government, but I do think that they, as long as they keep professing that that's the case, then they should act in that way.
Yeah.
I think the broader issues, well, the broader issues of identification, and obviously a lot of the debate at the moment around when is the right time to raise issues of gender identity, how do schools support that, but schools also involve families, the consensual issues then around, do schools talk to parents about this, and if the child, you know, wants to identify, those are really complex and really challenging moral, educational issues for schools to unpick, and society's unpicking those in a really complex way. So the other aspect of this is it sort of slightly trivializes, I think, some genuine debates within education about how do we support young people that might want to identify differently. What do we do if parents, you know, if a parent is hostile to that? What? So we're caught in really a kind of a time in society when these things are really rich conversations and really complex. And now the danger of this is that it just, you know, it's a good couple of days sort of social media fodder. But underlying it are issues that education is really struggling with. And the advice for schools around some of these things has been quite slow to come out. So schools are feeling their way. And obviously, in that case, some schools are going to make mistakes, or schools are going to interpret things and perhaps sometimes be behind that or two ahead of that sort of social position. But this is just sort of aggressively comedic about something which actually I think is really challenging for schools.
Yeah. It also takes the attention away from some of the other pressing issues that are out there, doesn't it? I mean, you know, whether that's, you know, it would be nice to know what is in that teachers' pay report, wouldn't it be really nice to know what that is? It'd be nice to know, rather than in the last week of term or the first week of the holiday, which is probably where it's going to land. You know, these are things that's just taking stuff away from the really pressing things that everyone's facing. What about, so James, what's caught your eye this week?
I think one of the things that was interesting, I mean, it's really interesting you said that last bit, because I've just come from a conversation with my fantastic executive business manager, and we were just saying that once again, you know, the first week of the holiday will probably be dominated by us all saying, right, we've now got to find X from next year's budget. So we're all preempting that we need to find that, but it's a crazy financial sort of, you know, improbity and in just for head teachers in particular, in that sense, particularly at the end of term, where you kind of want to just be looking at next year. Now I've got everything in place. Hopefully I've got my staff, I've got my curriculum. These are the issues we're going to look at to improve. And all of a sudden, this could really wind schools and school leaders. Yeah. And some of the things you might sort of be ambitious for next year, we might invest in this, that are potentially really vulnerable. So I think that's that piece of it. And it's not really necessarily in the news this week, but just working with some heads at the moment in and around the city who are either new to headship or new to schools. And still, for me, that slight sense of, with the league tables perhaps being more full fat this year, with the sort of, you know, back to more normalized grade boundaries, etc. Just that sense again of some angst within more complex schools about results again, and what that means for the school, what it means for the head in particular, and the vulnerabilities around that. And just that reflection again on the system sometimes needs to think, I think, carefully about how it retains and incentivizes recruitment to complex schools. And I know the MATs are doing a lot of work around that, but there's not, the system itself doesn't seem to engender much support for that.
Yeah, interesting. I was sort of, I can't reveal it at the moment, but I'm aware of a school that a head teacher has taken the school on, and I think the school is going to be classified as inadequate. And you then think, well, this head teacher who actually has not been there very long has this on their scorecard, you know, and actually not being given sufficient time to turn the thing round, you know, and it's this sort of idea that, you know, the Ofsted thing is incredibly brutal, you know, in terms of it not giving any sort of consideration around, well, how much time has this person had to deal with it? You know, it's just, this is the judgment, this is what I found, this is it, you know, and in a way that it's that, I mean, I wonder now whether I would go into headship if I could sit comfortably in a deputy headship role in a you know, effective school where I felt I was valued. I never felt like that as a deputy. I was driven to be a head teacher as quickly as I could, you know, not because I wanted the money or the status, but I just felt as though I wanted to sort of make that difference and be able to do it in a sense my way. But now I'd be thinking, there's too much. My mortgage would be at, you know, at risk, and all this sort of stuff that would be sitting behind it.
Would you not be thinking, rather than I don't want to be a head, you'd be thinking, I want to be a head, but I'm going to choose the school very carefully, because the challenge of some schools means that my personal integrity and ego might get really damaged.
Yeah. I mean, James, you could have got a job anywhere, mate, couldn't you? You know, you went yeah, sure, challenging area, went into the centre of Manchester. You know, what's in your DNA that makes you want to do that?
Well, I always tell a story famously. When I was a first head in Wythenshawe, the school had 14 heads in 8 years. And I had my first ever Ofsted inspection as a head at the start of my second term. And the HMI took me in the first meeting and said to me, James, there's going to be no elephants in the room. This school is going into a category. And I was sort of like, well, are you not supposed to be inspecting or something first? But anyway, that night I came home and it, you know, the day had been okay, and I said to my wife, oh, you know, it's going to be a bit tough. This is what they've said to me. And her first response was, I told you should have got a job in Cheshire. And it was that real response from like, obviously from someone, you know, someone who loves you, but also, yeah, you got to pay the bills, got to go through that. And what happens, though, there's a seriousness about it, is that what happens sometimes in complex schools is that you just get this litany of leadership change for all the right reasons. People struggled or they're not right. And so people are trying to do the right thing by it. And then you just get this cycle of sort of what I call non-stick improvement. Nothing quite sticks. Yeah. And they try loads of different things. And eventually the staff rightly almost become a bit cynical about, well, we've done that, or yeah, last year we tried this and did that. And there's a sort of piece, and I felt a bit when I first came here that almost the soul of the school then starts to think, well, maybe it is us. Maybe we are, this is what we are. We're a bit doomed in this way. And then the children will begin to feel that. So there's a seriousness about allowing a leader some time and I don't know what that would look like. I mean, really, I think to really get transformational, you'd need 3 years. In a couple of years, you're going to have some really strong shoots, but to really feel the difference. But that can seem quite a long time, particularly if you're coming off the back of that negative inspection.
Would a contextual paragraph at the start of an inspection that talks about the leadership and the change in the school Because if you're in that position, the first paragraph ought to say, this school was in a difficult position, has been taken over by a new leadership team. So far, they've made these improvements, but as it stands, these are the issues. So at least there's some credit to what a good leader is doing in a school that's been in, well, as you call it, complex school, a school in challenging circumstances. And then there's at least a recognition that there's somebody trying to do something that will make a difference, instead of just saying leadership is inadequate because something else is inadequate.
I think, and again, I think is like we were inspected in September and the school got good, which has been the staff. It was an amazing journey for everyone. It was very moving, and the team. I know but the Ofsted team actually worked very hard to try and understand and reflect the complexity of the school. It's a highly complex school, and just on 60 nationalities, 40 languages. So by any metric, it's going to be that way. But interestingly, my worst ever inspection is in my last school. We'd gone from the category, we'd gone then to RI, and then we then, maybe cockily went for outstanding. So we pitched it then, but all the metrics were in place, etc. And in the first meeting with the inspector in that inspection, she just said, "I'm not interested in the context and I'm not interested in the story. I'm here to see what I'm going to see." And this was a school that it was all about the story. The school was going to shut. It was literally on the edge of closure, huge deficit. And that was my worst inspection, actually, because I just thought, well, okay, then we're just going to play a really narrow game in that regard. Yeah. But I have to say, since I've been here, and I've been really blessed because I've often worked. Our inspections are often done by really senior, very thoughtful HMI. So I've had that blessing. But if you come back to the individual, if you come back to the school leader, then as you were just saying before, Stan, so you've got the TES on a Friday and you're looking at some of that. The other thing that can happen as well then is that a lot of that then is going to be based on your judgment of where they are in that Ofsted window, because so schools can have a lag then, and you're thinking, well, they're going to get inspected next year. Maybe that's the right choice then. And so there is that challenge around some of that. And again, some of the mats I think my school's part of United Learning. They've taken on some really complex projects that really, in some cases nobody else was going to sort of make right. And it's been really tough, but I think that moral purpose is admirable, and also everybody should take some of that on. Sometimes some mats, like some of the sort of like the co-op and some of those big mats in the north, who've really said, right, that's our moral purpose. By definition, then you're not going to see some of the improvements that some other mats have if it's all free schools or etc. So how we make that, how we incentivize some of that, and in results as well, CVA may not be perfect, but there's not much equivalent or any equivalent to that at the moment, and again that feels a bit reductive.
Yeah,
if a school changes from a local authority maintained school to an academy, there's no inspection then because it's a new school. It wouldn't be far-fetched to say, if we've changed the leadership of a school, we need to give that time before we throw an inspection at it. Or we need to do a sort of baseline inspection, that's all it is. We go in and we say, this is the state of the school as we see it now, a letter to the school to confirm that, not a published report, and then we will see you in 3 years as a new leadership team in the school and judge how the school's progressing against that baseline.
I think that's the way ahead, but actually I'd still go back to the self-evaluation bit of it,
Well, I do.
But the other thing is that I always find it quite disturbing when inspectors come in and say, like you had at Wythenshawe, James, very early on, this is going into a category, and this other inspection that I'm aware of, where within virtually the first half day, they've decided that it's not going to be all right, it's going to be worse than that. And actually, what for me, I was always taught you must go in assuming that it's going to be good. You have to find the evidence to prove to yourself that it's not good.
Yeah.
It's not a case of I'm at the bottom of the ladder, you've got to help me get up the ladder. I think, the vast majority of schools are good schools. So let's place ourselves on that ladder and let's see if I can find evidence that holds me at that rung on the ladder. If I can't, then it has to drop down, and explain to the school why it's dropping down. But this idea that you may well be able to determine whether or not you think it's going to be less than good fairly early on, to be honest. I think you can, but actually you've still got to be honest to the school and say, I'm coming in, you can throw everything at me to try and keep it on that run. And this idea that you make the judgment too early.
Don't you think, Frank, that when somebody's made that in their mind, that this is going into a category, the only evidence they then look for is that to confirm their already biased position?
The other thing that happens, so if you, like the hardest, like in the kind of casino of Ofsted, if you're going into a school that's had some turbulence.
We've never had it described like the casino of Ofsted, so that's going to be an element.
You roll your dice, and so in the first year of change management in a school that's been through some difficult times is really going to be hard, because you're saying, hey, there's a new promised land and this could be the future. And a lot of people will be looking at you like, I always felt when I first read it, they're like, oh yeah, all right, mate. Yeah, thanks for that. And then you get to like November and they're like, oh, well, he's still here. Right, thanks for that, mate. And then by February, you have got a little bit more traction, like, okay, that you've done 6 months now, nearly, well done. But that first part of it it's that kind of Woody Allen bit of 99% of success is turning up. It's just that bit of you're in every day, you're looking, and there's going to be lots of days where it feels sometimes it's gone backwards. It's not, it's not that you're having success, it's the fact that you're just holding a line for a bit, and then gradually you get those wins and you get that little shift in culture. But those are such delicate times. So here Ofsted came in my first year in March, and we were really, the team was very, very, I have to say, and the lead HMI was very, very good, and basically really backed. So we got RI then with good leadership management, but the team really backed what we were trying to do. So they did do that little bit of, it isn't, we can see, of course, it's not all in place, but the line of travel and the ambition and what you're doing to get there is right. So we back you, really. Here's an endorsement which says, yeah, you keep doing this, and we think this is gonna transform and this is going to improve. And obviously with a lot of work from all the staff, that happened. But if they come in Coldy, if they'd come in even a couple of months earlier, which would have been, maybe at the end of my first, you haven't got evidence. You can't demonstrate that. So then you're playing against the house. Then you haven't got, you haven't built up enough chips to fight back and to have that challenge within it. And that's the thing that when I talk to heads around, when they're talking about Ofsted, I'm always a bit like, right, okay, well, when do you think it's coming? Right, let's work back. Now we need to stack a few things in your favor, either really quickly or there's a bit more time, actually. You can do because that's what's sad, is that sometimes they come in and like what's embryonic is just rolled over, because by definition, of course, it's not embedded yet. It's very, very fragile. Those first few years, that first year in particular, everything's fragile, isn't it? And you lose some. You're going to lose some battles as well. So it's that fragility that's scary.
And the outcome of the inspection will identify areas that may not have been on the embryonic thing, and then what you've developed, what's starting to grow, is destroyed, because suddenly everything's got to shift to what the view of a group of inspectors have decided is the most important thing for the school. And I will say, I had head of children's services who came in to the authority that I was in at a time where the team that I was leading, and it was the team, not me, had done a fantastic turnaround of a system from losing, it was a traded service, it had lost 2.5 million in 3 years, to better than break even and making a small surplus. And the first thing she said to me was, I'm not interested in the past. I'm not interested in what they've achieved. I'm interested in today and what's happening today. And for the staff that had a fantastic achievement, it was like coming in and slapping each one of them in the face. It was, well, if you're not interested, we're not working.
There's another problem as well. So here's the other issue with the casino, okay? If you are working in a complex school, by definition, like I'm rarely out of school, because the school needs the school needs everybody to be passionate and involved with the school. That's where it's at. So by definition, it's much less likely that I might want to become an Ofsted inspector if that's what I wanted to pursue, because I live and breathe my school and my school demands that of me, and that's my job. So what you will also get is that sometimes the people that make the house rules are the people in schools that can facilitate them having that capacity, and therefore quite often you're very rarely getting a team, somebody that comes through the door, apart from often the HMIs are the best people, because they've got that time around those different schools, not just as an inspector, but as an improvement thinker and piece. So it's what I then call golf club syndrome, that sometimes inspectors walk into a school and they look like they've come off a golf club. They look a little bit terrified because they suddenly think they're in a city school, and you're a bit like, you sit in judgment of some of what we do, which is going to be different from what you do in your context, and it's really hard. Of course, there's urban leaders that will be inspectors, and they'll have some of that, but I imagine that's a percentage wise, that's a lot less. If I just think of Manchester, as the working heads of Manchester, very few, if any, are inspectors, because their schools, they demand high level, high presence leadership.
Yeah, I agree.
And also you've got to be of a certain grade before Ofsted will allow you to become an inspector. So again, that undermines the chances of people who lead schools in challenging circumstances being able to share that experience and knowledge and understanding with other inspectors. We were fairly fortunate when Frank and I began the inspection, because HMI hadn't done much inspecting in that way, and so the person who was leading us was asking us our view, our opinion. What do you think of that? Is this typical? Is this what we should be seeing? And that was great, because she obviously learned a lot from we learned a lot from her, but she learned a lot from us by asking, is this typical of a large primary school? Is that the kind of behaviour you would expect to see, as we were five primary head teachers at the time?
I as somebody who was a big advocate for head teachers getting involved in inspection, I'm less enthusiastic on it now than I was, and having experienced that, and call it out now, but Co-op Academy Leeds, it's that school is an incredibly complex school. It's a good school now, and the one inspection where Johnny Mitchell was the head got good leadership, but it deserves so much more than that. And the reason why it didn't get it is because actually the inspectors were not aware of what they were inspecting. Because actually I've inspected a lot and seen a lot, but I've not seen a school quite as complex as that. And to bring somebody in from a local grammar school into that scenario as an inspector is simply not good enough. And the school suffered for it, and that led to Johnny moving on, which is for me quite sad. But anyway, what's caught my eye this week? Cricket. So there was a report come out around EDI and cricket. It's been rumbling for about 2 or 3 years. It's a very lengthy report, and basically scythes away at the current cricket structure and the opportunities or lack of opportunities for young people and for adults to get involved in cricket in some areas of the country and in some sort of particular clubs, and it sort of made my brother, who he and I were very keen cricketers. He played at a slightly higher level than me, but we played together regularly in Essex, and we came from quite a poor family where we had no new cricket stuff given to us. It was always either the clubs or it was from players who were retiring and whatever. I remember the first pair of cricket boots I got were in my mid-20s. You know, and my brother and I were talking about it this week about, you know, it's in a way a lot of the focus has been around black cricketers, women's cricket, but actually there is a quite a significant section about, you know, poverty, poor kids playing cricket, and the problems if you are a good cricketer, the pathway to get into the elite side of it is not funded. So your parents or your carer or your mum, your dad, whoever it is, will have to fund you to get you to various events, various matches, various tournaments. There's no financial support whatsoever. So on top of the costliness of it, the fact that, as you were saying before we broadcast it or recorded it, that where you are, there's just not a lot of green spaces there. You know, you can play. I mean, when I drive in on past Southern Cemetery, there are a number of parks on the left-hand side, and often you will see informal cricket matches being played in the evenings. You know, there's a lot of cricket being played, but it's not in that structured environment. These are just young men and women who want to play cricket, and that's great. But actually, there needs to be much more than that, and they need to be integrated into a club structure so that actually, if there is a talented young boy or girl there, they've got an opportunity to be sort of wrapped up and captured within the club structure so that they can then move on to a higher level. So I was really heartened by the fact that it didn't just focus on gender or race or whatever. There was a real thing around poverty and how that impacts on getting involved in cricket.
I think cricket, every school I was in, I was the instigator of cricket, and this is in Salford. But there's a wider problem in that cricket isn't the first choice game for children in the city Salford. And so when I'm saying things like, well, you need to go and do some practice, we've got a game, you know, practice at the weekend, you know, we haven't got a bat, Mr. Johnson. Right, well, you know, here's a couple of bats from the school stock. You look after those, and then maybe all your friends can come round and you can, oh no, we can't go on their street at night because we'll get beaten up. It's a different street. And yet when I was in Lancashire working in Accrington, you talk about people playing on a bit of green. In Accrington, Asian lads are playing on car parks, they're playing on, and it's cricket. It's nothing, you know, you drive along the road and you can look down back alleyways and see groups of Asian lads playing cricket. But I suppose Lancashire has got probably a stronger cricket link than Salford had. But we have cricket leagues. We had competition between schools at primary level, but then it dies. And part of the problem is parents. No, because as well as the cost of equipment, there's the cost in time for parents, and that's very, very hard for a parent to say, right, I'll take you to a game, I'll take you to a club, I'll pick you up from the club, you know, maybe we can borrow some equipment, and there just isn't that desire.
Yeah, cascade it out from the school level. So cricket amongst some of our community is the premier sport. So we have a slight advantage. There's a buy-in to it. So we've got a brand new AstroTurf pitch, which we did in conjunction with Man United, and so the king of sport, football. The football, and when I say that as king, it's so dominant in that. So you know, I'm a big cricket fan, but so football serves. So then we've got a field. Last year in the drought and the 39 degrees temperatures, our field died. I mean, when I say like it was like the grass went. So it grew back like a kind of a dandelion memorial to what was there before. So in cricket terms, so I could build, and we looked at putting an artificial strip in somewhere, so you can get a bit of all round. So there's still work around some of that, but it's quite luxurious for a school with just a field, because obviously even a cricket strip, you're going to get a batsman, bowler, wicket keeper, maybe a few fielders, but it takes quite a lot of space. So school cricket is quite difficult in a school where you've got some good outdoor space, but it's not luxurious. So then a child's good at cricket and they say, okay, so around us, you have to go quite a way to the edges of Manchester. I think here Didsbury is the first, where you've got a formal cricket club. And then when you get to the formal cricket club, you've got to then be able to, get into the equipment issues around some of that as well. The other thing that happens with cricket is that it's really geographically spread. So petrol, a lot of our families won't need cars because they're right next to really good public transport networks, and that works day to day well. But if you suddenly got to go to somewhere in East Cheshire for a match, or you've got to go up to Bolton Way for a match, those things become really prohibited. So there's a need to look at some of that. There's a really thriving, and quite a lot of my students really enjoy indoor cricket scene and league. And there's real, I think it's a really exciting game. It's really fast, and you don't need that much space with it. So like a school sports hall is perfect for that. And the purists might, obviously wince a little bit and for that, but it's a really sort of action-packed game. So there's scope to rethink some of those things, but I looked at the cost of, and I can't remember the exact figure, but the cost of reseeding and regrowing my school field, and then obviously if I do that, I've got to basically shut it for however months is, and it was crazy. I said I could almost put an artificial pitch in for the cost of doing that. Yeah. So there's a lot of barriers around school sport, etc. So we like cricket and rugby were two that we were interested because the field became really dried out, really hard. Rugby became really difficult, and cricket demands quite a lot of space. But here's another thing that I think we really need to look at is the link between, some of our independent schools within the city, etc., have got some quite amazing cricket facilities. And then there has to be a continuing partnership there to allow access to that space, because few state schools are ever going to have the space or the money to build really tailor-made cricket facilities. And so you're going to have some real anchor schools, some hubs that allow other schools to come in and experience a proper square, a proper outfield, etc. And the problem is, whilst all that's happening, football is such a dominant cultural force at the moment that cricket just slightly withers a little bit in the school scene.
Sadly. Anyway, I'm going to move on to, because I'm conscious of the time, I just want you to talk briefly, James, if you wouldn't mind, about the Manchester Baccalaureate that we met recently when you were presenting with Andy Burnham and one or two others in Manchester at the launch. I mean, what's the thinking behind it and how much traction are you getting?
So and there's not much frustration. I'm not. This has really come from Andy, and at the moment I think it's quite it's in quite an early stage. But what really spoke to me about it was that we in my previous school and MA, we've always branded our non-EBacc suite as the MBacc, because I said in the thing, when I arrived, we really built up the EBacc pathway so that our the students that was right for really had an opportunity to get to that. So everyone got that and never did. And then people sort of said, "Oh, what about the rest of the students?" There's quite a large group there that's not. And then I sort of said, "Well, we need to think about it." And I didn't say anything. I just said, "Well, what should we call them?" And somebody said, "Oh, we'll just call them the non-EBacc." And I thought, like, that's wow, what a great you're the not in the club people. And so what Andy's doing, I think, really spoke to me in the sense that there needs to be a really strategic thinking about that group of children that either don't want to or is not the right pathway for. And the other thing I think that he's really trying to capture, which is really complex, is that if your child is going to do his EBacc, A-level, university, it's a really predictable pathway in terms of, you know, what the next steps are. There's a lot of challenge in it, and obviously it's not easy sometimes to get onto those next steps, but it's a very, very well rehearsed and well structured regime, UCAS, etc., etc. So when families students don't want that pathway, or it's not the right pathway, it's such a more complex field. So when we do our parent information evenings I've got one in a couple of weeks for my current year 10, and we start to talk about what it looks like in year 11 and different pathways, because we don't have a sixth form. The A-level bit is quite straightforward. You can almost gallop through that. But when you come out of the other bits and you want to talk about apprenticeships, degree apprenticeships, different access to different employer opportunities, it's such a more disparate field, and it creates understandably more angst within families, because it feels more tenuous. It feels a bit like, will we get this guy? And we don't know. We can't always guarantee some of those things. So I think Andy trying to bring it together and you know, his sort of sense of creating a UCAS for some of those other pathways. So say an apprenticeship, a degree apprenticeship has that same sort of systematic design around it, is a really valid piece. It isn't easy, and I think that there's bits within the current, you know, I think that, for example, the MBacc is going to have to be Progress 8 compliant, because otherwise schools aren't going to go near it. But you know, I remember when we launched the diplomas, I was part of a group that did the diploma work for Manchester, and there's been the traction around this area is never quite stuck. Yeah. I think the T levels are great. I think a lot of our students are really engaged with those. I know they're really complicated at an FE level, but as an aspiration, I think they're getting more and more buy-in from the children. So I think that trying to sort of articulate what it means if you don't want to go to university, or that's not right, is brave and ambitious, but there's loads of pitfalls and complexity in it. I don't underestimate that.
So Andy was talking though about implementation being sometime in 2024. Does that feel optimistic at this stage?
I think at some level it is. I think if the thing with this is, what I think you've got to be a bit careful, is that this isn't necessarily about, I think at a school level, most schools are doing some of this piece. It's the transitional points at 16 to 18 and 18 to employment or to apprenticeship that need just some sort of organisation and alignment, really, in terms of some of that. And again, that sounds straightforward. That will be complex. And with friends who lead some of the big FE colleges in the city, that is more difficult, particularly if you're not an A-level provider.
Yeah.
But if you come at it at the level of a parent and you're saying, right, okay, well, you know, he doesn't, my son, my daughter doesn't really want to go to university. He's looking at something different, right? So that there's a lot of research and background work that is necessitated then for the parent to do, to kind of be able to enforce that. And by definition, that's more difficult for some families, language issues, or just, you know, some things, you know, some things are dressed up as apprenticeships when they're not. They don't have that real quality training aspect with it. So it's a minefield that 2024 is probably is ambitious, but I think if you don't set that marker, we're not going to move towards it.
No. We always end these chats with our guest offering some sort of change that they would like to see. I don't know if you've twigged this, James, but I don't know if you've had thought about what that might be.
The change I would like to see within broader education is I would like to see genuinely school trip support from a range of different providers that understand that when I take a trip out, I'm financing probably 80 to 90% of that trip. And my parents are really generous, they're really committed, but many of the families, particularly mum, just can't afford to be generous in that donation. Whereas other schools will get 80% of that donated by parents.
Yeah.
And because there's very little flexibility when you phone up some of the big attractions, or you're trying to negotiate things and say, well, in fact, there isn't any. It's like, well, this is there might be a student fee.
Yeah.
So whether or not it's a pupil premium like rate, whether or not it's something like that, because the cost of transport is already really high now for school trips. And there's a real danger of an us and them piece around access to education with character and the enrichment of that, because schools where you're really paying for a lot of that, by definition, are going to have a less sort of open range of opportunities, and that goes, and then going abroad or something like that is a whole other step. So some sort of scheme or system which allows schools to have access to some money or some sponsorship or some help to facilitate taking children on trips out of the country, because at the moment that's unrealistic for.
It's in a different time now, but when I was ahead, we managed to get various industries local to put money into a fund which was for school visits, and it was separate from school funds, separate from the school's money, and they were, I mean, it's less so probably now, but they were keen to do it almost without worrying about what the school was doing with that money, because we also linked it to the work we were doing with industry, so that enterprise and stuff was all into that budget. But it's still difficult, and I'm passionate about children going out and seeing and experiencing things, not doing all their learning in the classroom. And I do think the transport bit is one of the biggest problems at the moment, because of the simple cost of just getting children. Even if some of these places you want to visit said, okay, well, we'll do it for you for the lowest price we've ever done it for, you've still got to get them there and back. And that's significant cost.
I'm going to bring it. We'll end with Kevin Collins. I mean, I think that 15 billion, some of that was on that cultural capital stuff, wasn't it? In a way, we're suffering from the lack of investment. I think post-pandemic, I'm feeling it in the areas that I'm supporting, and the families that it's little surprise that some kids are finding getting back into school now very challenging. But we've nearly gone on for about 50 minutes, which is about 20 minutes longer than we normally do. James, can I thank you very much for your time today? We're back next week with another guest. We've got a couple of weeks before we close for the summer, but hopefully, James, your results and everything land well this summer. Fingers crossed. And thank you very much for your time. And we'll see you all next week. So take care, everybody. Bye-bye.